Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to this podcast episode of Yogananda Podcast, Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. Today, we're going to be doing the footnote, the Mammoth footnote in chapter 2. And I'd say this is probably the first of the Mammoth footnotes in the Autobiography of Yogi, the first of many. Guruji does like a good Mammoth footnote, doesn't he, Mike?
He does, absolutely. And they're super interesting. That's why we thought, let's make a whole episode out of it instead of just glossing over it.
Yes, there was some resistance to making a whole episode out of this from some people, but I thought it was a necessity, considering the.
I would call it debate. Yeah.
I thought it would.
For clarification, the debate was: should we cover it in the normal episode, or do we still wanted to cover the topic? I suppose is worth noting, not to just leave it out entirely.
No. Before I left for my gypsy traveling ways, I believe we were saying, oh, it doesn't warrant I was saying it warrants a separate episode because it's so detailed, and you're like, no one's it's not going to be that long, and I'll prove you wrong today. Not that that's my intention.
We are looking forward. We're all looking forward to learning more about this topic.
Me too. It's been quite a learning curve, I must say, because the footnote has 4 or 5 different, quite deep topics. It starts off with the amulet and a little bit more about that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the amulet and where it's kind of referenced more in the Autobiography of a Yogi. And then it talks about the mantra, the sacred sound words, which are relevant for us because of our practices and the teachings that we have. And then he talks about the language of Sanskrit and its beauty. And there's various references in that also to ancient civilizations of the past, which we should also delve into a little bit. So that should cover us. I should imagine shouldn't take, I'm going to put my finger in the air, shouldn't take more than 40 minutes. But if you 3 babble on more than usual, then
we'll try and keep it them.
So much
I would not rely on that estimate. Yeah.
No, I have a reputation, an engineering reputation of being very accurate in my estimation. So you must oblige, and we must fulfill the aim.
As an engineer myself, I would say engineering estimates are the worst kind of estimates.
Oh, jeez. Oh dear.
Software developers are notorious for overpromising on time
and under delivering, if I recall.
Didn't say that. I didn't say
right. So the first topic then. So it's he asterisks the word amulet. One may not fully unveil the heart of an amulet. But then Guruji, in his infinitely curious ways, gives us a little peek behind that unveiling the heart, because he says in the footnote that it is an astrally produced object, and he says words such as it's structurally evanescent, and then that those kind of objects finally disappear from the earth. And I know you guys covered amulet previous episode, but which was a fantastic episode, by the way. I really enjoyed that whilst on my travels. But I thought there was some things that we could also bolster with that conversation. And one of the things is that it's mentioned in chapter 43. So I'd like to go through that a little bit, where and which bits may be relevant for that. So we'll do that. But also in there's another chapter that's covered in, which we'll go into, chapter 47, which I think that's conjecture, but we'll also go into that. But before we do, the the amulet that you guys kind of concluded that it was like a not a ring, like a bracelet, a brooch type thing. I think you kind of said in the previous. In my mind, because of the way he wrote like ancient, Sanskrit mantras etched on it, in my mind it was almost like little like cup, little trophy or something, one ornamental cup in my mind, in my imagination. So that's interesting. But Mike?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like I thought it has to be something you wear around your neck, but I don't think he ever wore it around his neck, right? He said he had it in an envelope, which means it probably was more flat than a cup, but I don't really know what it looked like exactly.
I wonder in which of the three worlds that amulet is currently in right now. Yeah, so we don't know, obviously, but it triggers, Lauren.
There's just a very slight little clue where it says that it was round and anciently quaint. So, I mean, as a shape, anything can be round, right? It's quite curious, but yeah, I suppose that's why we made our conclusion. But it could have been a cup. It could be. But I guess that's the reason he never told us, because the form was not for our knowledge.
There might also be a hint later on as to that it could have been a cup, which we'll go into, which is probably why my mind went there. But the other round cup. the other round things that have got like ancient writings on it. You'd remember Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the ring. That was an object that you may describe as an amulet in kind of mystical potency. So that I think those kind of things were certainly must have been inspired by concepts such as the amulet that we're talking about. Obviously, I don't know where he got that inspiration from. Maybe dropped into his mind in a meditation, and when he was in his youth, or when he was writing the book, or had the idea for the book. I know, Chris, you're a big fan of that genre, aren't you?
I do love the mystery of it, and I've actually just shared a picture to the group of this chat on the Zoom call that we're doing. Sorry for listeners and viewers, you both won't be able to see it, but this is what I envisaged. It's something similar to a full circle with writing all along the outsides. But it's funny you mentioned this, Priyank. Actually, cup was the first thing when I first read this book. It was the first thing that came into my mind. I pictured it like a little mini trophy of sorts. But in general, it's unknown to us. I would love to hear more about it.
I reckon J.K. Rowling also got inspired by this in her Elder Wand and all those other mystical. Even though the book's full of magic, there's magic within the magic, isn't there? And this kind of fits that genre. And then also I thought of the story of Aladdin and the lamp. Yeah, could that have been inspired by amulet type theories or ideas? Who knows, Mike?
One thing they all have in common is they're all made of metal. Like maybe that means it's something long-lasting, or metal carries energy or something like that.
So it says, Guruji says that it was an astrally produced object. Now we know at least we know in detail one of the astral worlds, which is mentioned in chapter 43, which is also mentioned in this footnote. And that is, of course, the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, where Sri Yukteswar in detail describes the Hiranyaloka world, the astral world. So Guruji says in this footnote that it was an astrally produced object, which implies that some being in the astral, i.e. a planet such as Hiranyaloka, perhaps even Sri Yukteswar, if time doesn't follow a linear scale, perhaps even Sri Yukteswar, produced this object on Hiranyaloka, and dropped it into existence through this sadhu who came to see Mukunda's mother. Sadhu we don't know anything about, but the sadhu may well have been Babaji, may well have been Sri Yukteswar, we don't know. But he produced this object and put it into the material world, or the planet Earth, through this sadhu, and gave it to the young mother of Mukunda. So I was going through the chapter 43 for any mentions of such objects or such magical amulet type things. And Mike, can you open the astral objects card and read the first paragraph that I found?
The astral cosmos is more naturally attuned than the earth to the divine will and plan of perfection. Every astral object is manifested primarily by the will of God and partially by the will call of astral beings. They possess the power of modifying or enhancing the grace and form of anything already created by the Lord.
Now, we don't want to get into the chapter 43, but we're just going to focus on some of the words here. So Mike just read out, they possess the power of modifying and enhancing the grace and form of anything already created by the Lord. So the first word there is grace, enhancing the grace. So we know the role that the amulet played in Mukunda's life. And certainly, if it wasn't an enhancement of grace, then it was at least a holding on of the grace, allowed Mukunda, I think he describes it, to fly high on the wings of the amulet. And then this is why also I thought that it may have little handles or something, because I can imagine him holding and Mukunda flying away into the heavens whenever he should so desire in his meditations, which is interesting.
Sorry, the thought that sorry to interrupt, Frank. Harry Potter and the thing that he catches, the snitch or the
snitch. Oh yes, the snitch.
Something like that, because he has to whisper to it, doesn't it? And then it opens up and wings come out of it as well, which
the golden snitch. No, not that.
Yeah. I don't think he even has to talk. He just has to
breathe on it or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes. So Chris, do you want to read the second paragraph that I found?
Sure. Astral desires are thus connected with an astral being's power to precipitate all objects and experiences as forms of light or as condensed thoughts or dreams.
And hence we get the word in the footnote, which is structurally evanescent. And then such objects must finally disappear from our earth, and hence perhaps return to whence they came, which would be perhaps Hiranyaloka. We have no idea, of course, but the ideas came into my mind as I was reading chapter 43 again in preparation for this episode. Mike?
There's another chapter that it also reminds me of that comes later on in the Mohammedan Wonder Worker, where he constantly creates things that have an expiration date, right? So that seems to be a theme with everything that's created from the astral cosmos, that it can stay here, but the clock is ticking.
Very good point. I need to now go into that in my leisure. Lauren?
Yeah, I'm curious as to your thoughts on why you think it has a time limit on Earth.
Not that I think.
Well, we know. Sorry, as in, like, why you think that it does, like the reason as to why it must disappear.
The reason. It serves a specific purpose, doesn't it? And that purpose was to allow Mukunda to carry on, or remind him perhaps of his divine purpose, and then for him to hold on to that grace until his guru, he can take his shelter under Guruji, his guru, which is Sri Yukteswar. So perhaps that's why. That's the purpose that it fulfilled, and then potentially if it got into the wrong hands, then I don't know, other things that aren't supposed to happen may happen. But we are going to talk about a bit later about subtle energy forms, such as the amulet in Hindu temples. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Mike?
I always think of it like we are like in a sandbox on Earth, and everything we have around us, we took some of that sand and shaped it into something, and now it's like there. And then when it's like astral, then it was injected with this astral energy, and maybe that's why it's hard to be permanent, because it wasn't made out of things from here. It was actually, it came from somewhere else, and it eventually has to go back there.
Very good point. But what happens to the things that touch it? Like, you know, metals, physical metals on this plane, they usually have some reaction with oxygen and they oxidize and all that kind of stuff. I guess this object, being beyond the material atoms, didn't have any such reaction to anything. Who knows?
I'd love to have one and try it out. Maybe, yeah.
We could do many experiments, Mike.
Yes. Give it to the engineers. Can I see your amulet for a sec? Yeah.
we don't want the grace. We want to do experiments.
I'm into material science. Yeah.
We want to see how much of Aladdin's genie lamp capability does it have. Okay. So the second mention in chapter 47. So chapter 47 is when Yogananda, after his travels from the US, Sri Yukteswar gives him the title of Paramahansa, but he returns to US and then he's giving presents to all of his, disciples and people in the Mother Center, and he turns to Mr. E. Dickinson, and if you remember, that's one of his long time devotees, and he gives E. Dickinson a cup, a long cup, and then Mr. Dickinson gets very emotional, turns away and walks away and has some time to himself. And then if you recall that story, that's the story where he said, when I was young, when I was a boy, I was drowning and some man with long hair came and rescued me. And then later on, when I came to the US, I came to a talk by Swami Vivekananda, and I recognized that the boy that saved me, the man that saved me, was Swami Vivekananda. So I approached him thinking that he must be my guru. And then Swami Vivekananda says, no, your guru will come later and he will hand you a cup. And Yogananda fulfills that prophecy and that connection with the masters by giving Mr. Dickinson a cup. And then Vivekananda also tells him in that moment, stay out of water, because obviously he had to save him from drowning. So that cup, now Yogananda just presents it as like a gift, like he may have got it from anywhere. But we obviously have no clue as to that cup. We don't know where that cup, it is described as a silver cup. But just another conjecture, was it something akin to a amulet for Mr. Dickinson, because he might just attach that he became he got the title of Yogacharya, so he became quite important for Self-Realization Fellowship, and he was there for 40 years, serving Master, and perhaps the cup also in some way, because it's Guruji gives 2 pages to the story, very seemingly inconsequential. So it's just a nice story, but 2 pages. I kind of, for some reason, I feel that it's the grace involved seems to be somehow connected to an amulet type grace. So again, conjecture, but who knows, Mike?
I think it's a really good guess that this cup was also an amulet. And also, where is it now? Do you think it like kind of disappeared at some point, or do you think it still exists somewhere?
Well, Mike, the day we have a monk on on the show, we can
We can ask him all those questions.
where
Right,
is
add it to the list. What is the
question
cup?
1? Where is that cup? Do you have it,
Yes.
or did you have it and then it disappeared after the passing of Mr. Dickinson? Because if it disappeared, then we know we got conclusive proof that it was.
Maybe it ended up in someone's pantry or something. I don't know. Someone's kitchen cabinet's like, oh, what is that cup?
So next, let's go to the next topic. So the next topic Guruji talks about is that the fact that the amulet had certain inscriptions on it, i.e. a mantra. Now, he doesn't tell us what the mantra is, but in the footnote, he describes what a mantra is. And he kind of says that it has the potencies of sound and of vach. Vach is basically is the goddess of kind of literature, goddess of like the Vedas kind of thing. So it's this ancient word which is used for basically sound. And then he also says the human voice have nowhere else been so profoundly investigated as India. So mantra, we'll talk a little bit about mantra. So mantra is a consecrated sound, and Guruji here is saying that the sound element, the mystical or the cosmic sound elements, has nowhere investigated than in India. And then he later on talks about mentions the Upanishads, which is one of our revered scriptures. And in the Upanishads, I'll just recite a very popular mantra that people in India use. My mom used to use, and grandmothers all across India use, and yogis use. And the mantra is Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Mrutangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So that is a scriptural mantra that is used very often. Thank you, Mike. Chris, do you want to just open that card and tell us what that means?
Yes, and it's interesting because I've actually heard this before, fairly recently with.
You hang out with Priyanka a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I didn't know what it meant, so I'm really happy to now look at it. From ignorance, lead me to truth. From darkness, lead me to light. From death, lead me to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Beautiful.
And you'll notice that the word Om is in there. And we talked about this in the past, but Om is probably the first mantra that is probably of the most importance and the most universal. Find it in yoga studios, recited in yoga studios around the world. But this little scripture, from ignorance, lead me to truth, from darkness, lead me to light, from death, lead me to immortality. This is a universal applicability, isn't it? It could be biblical, as it could be Quranic, as it could be and is of Indian and Hindu origin. I absolutely love that mantra. I don't know if and also the mantra, the only mantra that is in our cosmic chants book is Hymn to Brahma, which I often chant in English and then in Sanskrit, and then back in English when I'm asked to lead a service. And the words in Sanskrit are obviously also there, but that's a beautiful one as well, which is a favorite amongst devotees. Mike?
Isn't mantra also one of the paths of yoga, like one of the ways to achieve God union by mantra, by chanting the right sounds, creating the right vibration. So
Yeah.
I guess that's how important it is.
Yeah. So the technique is japa, and the mantra is used in the japa technique. So the mantra is often given by a guru. So you don't generally tend to just pick a mantra that you like. It's like an initiation. So if you were going to make that your life, practice, then you'd have to be given a specific mantra by a guru, which would have certain impact, shall we say, on your temperament and on your spiritual practice. So Guruji then describes the Om vibration in the footnote, and the word, which is the voice of many waters in the Bible. And there's some very good descriptions of that in the Second Coming of Christ, which you can look at, because it references also the Holy Ghost there, and in a very Indian kind of interpretation on the Holy Ghost and the Om vibration and the relation between the two. But the other thing that he says here, which is interesting, is it has three manifestations or gunas. And now gunas, we know, essentially three qualities. Three qualities are the mode of satya, which is goodness, rajas, which is like the mode of passion, and tamas, which is the mode of darkness. And everything, every action, every object, every food, everything, every practice falls into one of these categories. So an activity that can take you towards God, keep you in a state of inertia, or take you away from God. And food is a very obvious one in this, because light organic food, if you have a salad, for example, and you try and meditate in 2 hours time, you'll notice that you can meditate. But if you have something very oily and heavy, perhaps meat, then you will notice that it will work against you in a couple of hours, or afterwards in the meditation, depending on how much you eat and all that kind of stuff. So everything falls into those categories. And then Guruji says that he refers to gunas essentially as those of creative, preservative, and destruction. And then he refers to a certain section of the Upanishads. So creation, preservation, and destruction. So guys, if you open up the Trimurti card, or the aspects of God as Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh is Shiva. So most people that have studied a little bit of Hinduism will know that there's three principal kind of God characters, personalities in Hindu law. One is the Brahma, which is essentially the creator. And the second one is Vishnu, which is the preserver. And the third one is Shiva or Mahesh, which is he's responsible for the destruction and the recreation, therefore, of the universe. But you will note, Mike, you've probably been to India, but you haven't been to a Brahma temple. And there is a reason for that. No one worships Brahma directly, and there is a reason for that. Chris, do you want to read out the first part of that?
According to a Shaiva legend from the Shiva Purana, once Brahma, the god of creation, and Vishnu, the god of preservation, had an argument over their supremacy. To settle the debate, Shiva pierced the three worlds, appearing as a huge infinite pillar of light. The Jyotirlinga.
Jyotirlinga.
Jyotirlinga, thank you. Brahma and Vishnu decided to ascend and descend across the pillar of light respectively to find the end of the light in either direction. According to some iterations, Vishnu assumed his Varaha avatar to achieve this task, while Brahma rode a Hamsa, swan.
Mike?
Cool. Brahma lied that he had discovered the end of the light, producing a Ketaki, a flower, as proof, while Vishnu admitted that he could not find the end of the light from his journey. The dishonesty of Brahma angered Shiva, causing him to curse the creator deity, that he would not be worshipped. All right. He also declared that Vishnu would be eternally worshipped for his honesty. The Jyotirlinga shrines are regarded to be the temples where Shiva appeared as a fiery column of light.
So some of you will have seen our videos. I recently went to India. That's why I've been away for the past few episodes. And one of the temples I went to was a temple called Kedarnath. So there's 12, I think, something like that, 12 Jyotirlinga sites across India. Jyotirlinga means a linga is a form. The form is like an ellipsoid form, and Jyotir is obviously light. So in India, there's 12 temples where this Jyoti appeared or manifested itself. So these are the most important temples essentially in India, of which Kedarnath is one of them. And I did a vlog on that recently, so I can share that with you. But there's 12 other sites, and my wife and I went to a few of them. One of them interesting, actually. Yeah, Mike, so I'll let you come in first.
If you go to Kedarnath, so there's this temple and the linga is inside it, like in a central spot, and that, so they built a building around it.
That's right. And
Cool.
they don't know how old it is. It's impossible to age. They can only age the outer stones, but that's thousands of years old, but they don't know how old it is. So we were at the Ajanta and Laura caves, of which I did another vlog, and we just had dinner, and I said, oh, let's go for a walk, which we hadn't really done before that. So I said, let's go for a walk, and then in the hazy distance, I saw a temple, the top of a temple, and I said, oh, let's go to that temple. And then my wife was like, okay, and my brother-in-law was with me as well, so yeah, let's go. And then we just went in there, and then it was this colossal from the outside it just looked like there's millions of temples in India. It just looked like another temple, and then when we went inside, it was actually one of the Jyotirlinga sites, one of the 12 Jyotirlinga sites. And then we went in, and even though I should have known, perhaps we were going to be near one, I hadn't done my research that day, but Guruji divinely guided me towards that, not missing out on that blessing. So we talked about astrally produced objects being, i.e., the amulet, but the shrines in India, and especially the Jyotirlinga sites, which are very important, their origins are sometimes unknown. The lingas sometimes form out of nothing, and then hence temples are created around them. So there's some link, I believe, between the astral and this world of some of those shrines that are in India and the ones that are kind of the amulet description that's written about in this book. Another thing I wanted to just briefly mention was we talked about the astral world, but beyond that is obviously the causal world. And in the causal world, you can, if you remember from chapter 43, you can create and destroy your own universes. So you have that power. So you might then therefore argue that Brahma, in his causal world, is created this universe. So this universe from the causal was created by Brahma in that way, and that's why Brahma is Brahma in Hinduism, perhaps. And that could potentially be the link of the causal, the description of chapter 43 of the causal, astral, and the material worlds. Again, just conjecture, but it does seem to marry quite nicely. So that's Jyotirlinga stuff. Then Guruji talks about the Sanskrit mantra, and he says that when correctly pronounced, a spiritually beneficial vibratory potency is then given. And then he says, so he kind of draws on the word pronounced, and then he talks about the Sanskrit alphabet, which consists of 50 letters, etc. And then each with an invariable pronunciation, which is completely unlike most of the European languages. Because there is, no matter which part of India you're from, there is one pronunciation for certain, for the vowels and the syllables that are there. And then he mentions George Bernard Shaw, who was a Irish playwright, a very famous one, contemporary of Guruji's. Have you heard of him, Chris?
Yeah, vaguely, yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
wouldn't be within the arts world myself, but yes.
So he wrote, this is hilarious, in his customary ruthlessness. He wrote a preface to the Mr. Wilson's book, The Miraculous Birth of Languages, and I read the whole preface today and part of the book. So the book is about the evolution of language and its link to the evolution of man and the development of the psyche of man and civilization. And he links the language, the development of language in that. And Mr. Shaw, being so famous, he was asked to write the preface for this. And in the preface, Mr. Shaw just has a 20-page rant on the poor use, the poor structure and the makeup of the English language. And he writes quite powerfully. And Guruji says, with his customary ruthlessness, if the introduction of an English alphabet, the English language, costs a civil war, I shall not grudge it. So what he's saying there, he's suggesting a new language, a new way of writing that is more, easily and less easily usable and less room for interpretation and dialects and spellings and, evolution. It shouldn't evolve, it should be fixed. Yeah, Mike?
As someone who had to learn English as a second language, I must say pronunciation in English makes absolutely no sense. And every other language, I think French is equally bad, but most languages, every letter has a meaning and it stays consistent. And in English, it's just not like that. It's just
atrocious.
It's like that because it's like that. Yeah.
It's atrocious. I don't know why God allowed English to be the language of choice for this particular podcast, but that is the way, and that is where we are. But I'll give you an example, Lauren. It's being the only resident English person, quote.
English.
I don't know. Actually, do you have a bit of, I don't know, Celtic blood in you or something?
I think my nan had Irish roots, but that's as far as I know.
Oh gosh!
But like far. She wasn't.
I wanted a thoroughbred English person to answer this question. What do you say, Chris? Sorry.
There's such thing. It's the history of England, isn't it? Invasion.
True.
Yeah.
Let's do a genetics test and find out. No, I'm just kidding. I was going to ask Lauren, what is the purpose of the written word, the written English word? This is not a trick question, just what comes to you.
I think for me, it's the conveying of a thought into understanding, intellectual understanding. And I feel like that kind of sums up the English language for me, because it is quite intellectually created, especially with its roots. It seems like we've drawn from so many different places and we've created this language in our minds rather than letting it flow from somewhere else. Yeah.
It's
So
like
if
like a spaghetti bolognese of languages, isn't it?
it is, and I think that's also what's beautiful about it. And I mean, I know you were talking about how easy it is to misinterpret or misspeak
Pronounce,
certain
yeah.
vowels. That's it, mispronounce. But I actually quite love that about the English language. You know, you can be in different parts of the country and you all speak differently, and there's such creativity to that, I feel, with being from this country, you know, and it's such a beautiful music in this country from different places. But I have to agree with George Bernard Shaw here. it's for me, it's quite intellectualized, and being a teacher or being in that environment with children who are learning to spell, it's not clear for them, and it doesn't make phonetic sense. But yeah, I'm curious.
You answered the question too perfectly. I was hoping you'd just say something like to you know, so you can read out what the thoughts of the writer were. And then I could have said what George Bernard Shaw has said in this in another part of this preface. He said that he quoted, thus an intelligent child who is bidden to spell the word debt, D-E-B-T, and very properly spells it D-E-T, is caned for not spelling it with a B, just because Julius Caesar spelt the Latin word for it with a B. And now for the millennias, and heaven only knows how long, the silent consonant of B will be in the word debt for some obscure, unknown reason, which will confuse thousands, millions, billions of people in the future. Lauren?
And it does confuse people, because I work with visually impaired students and students who are completely blind. And I remember having a conversation with a 14-year-old, and, you know, they were saying that he's trying to spell, but it's hard because they've never seen the letters. So, you know, he's spelling it phonetically in his head, but in actuality, it's not how you spell it. And it doesn't make any sense. So I do wonder if at one point the English language will develop and shift. But knowing how rigid we are in our roots, maybe not. What do you think, Mike?
I think there's a certain amount of pride carried in a language, and maybe it's pride mixed with the feeling that the older generation says, like, we had to go through all this, so now the young people have to do the same, because that's just how it is. But there is some amount of pride in having Latin roots in English. So like you could spell the word night or light, L-I-T-E, which would make a lot more sense in my opinion. But then it looks like a 5-year-old spelled it, right? It doesn't, and then if you spell it properly, it looks so sophisticated, right? It's like, I don't know why those feelings are conveyed, but it's kind of like that.
They've brainwashed us so much.
That's actually how it feels, though, doesn't it? If you do write it L-I-T-E, you do feel like a child. Maybe that's part of our culture as British people. You know, there's a lot of pride in there.
The most hated word George says in his experience is the word height, for no reason whatsoever. Height is H-E-I-G-H-T. What is going on with that word?
Well, I suppose it does make sense, because slightly, if you hear the very delicate sounds, there is a change in intonation and how you pronounce that. So if you didn't have the E, how would you know the I sound changed?
What it would need to be H-I-T-E.
Height. But then it would sound different, because height, it's the E that leads into the G, you see? So it's quite delicate. I mean,
I don't think there's a diphthong in height. It's just
height. Well, I mean, I did study.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, well, it was part of my drama course, when I studied to be an actress in another life, we did accents, and we studied them quite in depth, and we looked at all the different vowel sounds and what leads to what and why certain sounds are there and letters. It's actually really interesting.
Yeah,
I got quite nerdy about it. I love learning.
Yes.
But yeah, it is interesting,
Yes.
and I feel like it's definitely a discussion that we could speak about for millennia.
I'm trying to get to a point, but before I do, Mike.
That's English is also a language that has multiple influences, right? It has this really strong German influence. So, for example, night, the GHT is because in German it would be Nacht. So we have it like with CHT at the end. And then in English, they probably pronounce it somewhat similar, and then it evolved and evolved, but the spelling never evolved. It's only the way people said it evolved, right? And then after a while, you get all those words, and then the silent H in the beginning is from French, right? So then there's a lot of French words in, but then if you don't know the history of the word, you go like, does this come from French? Does it come from German? Does it come from somewhere else? So like it's impossible to know just by the spelling how to pronounce it sometimes.
So George, exactly right. So the pronunciation. So what Lauren was also getting at just now was the regional dialectical pronunciation, i.e., it changes depending on which part of England or which part of US or which part of Europe you're speaking the language. And if an engineer were to design a language and allow, and have an idea, written idea conveyed, so the reader can read it in one way, English as it is currently structured needs many more characters, many more vowel sounds to define what an I is and what an E is, so there's no variance. So that's what Shaw was essentially getting at. And he's obviously getting that because Sanskrit is such a language. That was the whole purpose of this digression. So if, for example, there is a word there that is spelt in Sanskrit in one way, no matter which part of India, and we talked about this, and this is why it's important, because a mantra, if you mispronounce it, it doesn't have the correct impact. So the language is, they call it the script, they call it Devanagari. Deva is God, so it's like a language of the gods is what essentially the script means. So the pronunciation is very important. So earlier on I recited a mantra, but if one person was pronouncing it one way, another person was pronouncing it another way, there's this room for the evolution of that mantra could then take new forms and mean new things in the future. But actually, the way the language is structured, it can't evolve. This is fixed. So with some confidence, scholars say that a Sanskrit mantra now would have sounded exactly as it would have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, because the structure of language is so fixed in terms of the way you pronounce vowels, the way you say consonants. And I'll give you an example of this. So the alphabet, the script for Sanskrit, so it is very, very scientific. So the sounds are laid out from which part of the mouth they come from. So the first letter in the Sanskrit alphabet is ga, then it's ka, ga, ga, then it's ja, cha, cha, ja, ja, then it's da, ta, da, da, then it's da, ta, da, da. So what you should have seen is the sound is coming from the back of my mouth, and then it becomes dental. Then I'm using my teeth and my tongue. So it's laid out. So to get that sound, it comes from a very specific place, and you can't then get it wrong. Like I can't say fa when that sound should be coming back from the back of my mouth, which is ga, right? So it's laid out very, very as if a scientist has come up with it, so it can't evolve in the future. And the vowels are of a similar quality. So I thought that was quite interesting, and that's essentially what George Shaw has basically advised for us to do, which is add to the English language. So pronunciations and variations of dialects are fine, they're normal, but if you're writing something and you want it to be read, then it should be clear. So for example, then someone from up north, Lauren, can spell it differently, because that's how but we spell it exactly the same. We spell the word exactly the same and pronounce it differently, but it should be, okay, you say it like this, so you can spell it like this. There should be a link between how you say it and how you write it. And with Sanskrit and the whole link to mantra, i.e. the importance of the consecrated sound, which is, part of your sadhana, part of your practice. Mike said, you make mantra, you do japa yoga. So a guru may give you a mantra that might take you through lifetimes, perhaps. So you can't get that. You can't evolve that mantra. You have to nail it, and you have to be very specific with how you pronounce it, which is, very important, because we know the importance of the pronunciation in Sanskrit, which is possibly why Guruji has given so much emphasis in this footnote about the language in this whole page of a footnote that he's gone on. You might say it's a tangent, but certainly it's an important one, and which is why possibly I was so keen to do this episode, because I didn't want to miss what's here. So we can, with that said, I think that's enough of a digression on Sanskrit. There's another cool thing that he wrote in the preface, what George Shaw wrote in the preface. Chris, you see the picture on the header of that card, the inadequacy card. Can you read that, the Chinese?
Sure. Can I read the Chinese?
Yeah, read that paragraph on the picture.
The Chinese, accustomed to an uninflected monosyllabic language, do not say, "I regret that I shall be unable to comply with your request. Sorry, no can." There's something kind of rubbed out there, but sorry, no
can. That's how they would say it. So they might say, instead of saying, "I regret that I shall not be able to comply with your request," a Chinese person may say, "Sorry, no can." In my atrocious accent. But George is saying that is quite sufficient to convey that exact message, but and it saves both parties time, energy, ink.
I'm learning Portuguese at the minute. My wife's Brazilian, so I'm learning Portuguese. I have 2 lessons a week, and I'm learning the differences of how to convey a meaning in a different language. So it is interesting, because when you're indoctrinated one way into thinking through a language, everything else may seem ergo, because of the history of the British Empire and things like that, lesser or less evolved or something. I think I've grown up with the idea that Shakespeare sort of evolved the English language to a level where it's quite sophisticated now, and maybe the older ways of talking, which I think may have been more similar to this, a little bit less sophisticated, from what I understand, seem to be a little bit less evolved or something. But yeah, seems to be more efficient now when I'm looking at fresh eyes.
Mike?
Yeah, as a non-English person, I don't really agree with the notion that more text makes more sophistication. So I feel like because I know in German the mentality is just different. Like we don't beat around the bush as much as especially British do. Like if you have a message, you just put it out there and that's it. And in English there's this thing it seems more polite if you write it in a 3-line sentence rather than just saying what you want.
We're really beating up the English language, aren't we?
And enjoying it. No, just kidding.
Enjoying it and speaking it, and enjoying speaking it, and enjoying butchering it. All types of enjoyment.
All of the above.
I've got I picked up a book called the Concise English Language, which is basically a book on how to say things with the most economical use of words. Which essentially gets our engineering reports from 150 pages down to 10 pages. That we stop beating around that linguistic book. Let's move on swiftly on. That wasn't so swift. But the next topic that he kind of just brings in and out is the Mohenjo-daro and the Indus Valley civilization. So he kind of says that the discoveries of these ancient archaeological sites across northern India, in Pakistan, modern day Pakistan as well now, suggest that Sanskrit is not a language that's derived from Semitic sources. It's it's a language in its own right and ancient. We don't know how old. And he talks about the momentous archaeological finds of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. I've been to one Indus Valley site. It's called Lothal in Gujarat, and these sites are like 5,000 years old. So they're contemporaries of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and places such as that. So, and it's as well structured and as as well built as any site that you'd see in Egypt. Stone buildings, waterways. You can have they've got granaries, and the one in Lothal has got a dock, and that's it's like 100 miles inland, so they've got a dock for ships. So this is quite an advanced civilization, shall we say? And their script is undeciphered as we speak, I believe. It's undeciphered, but we know that the links with ancient Hinduism are certainly there. For example, the crescent moon symbol of the Shiva are often found on the seals and the symbols in those sites. So the culture would have been there at that time. So it wasn't a completely different set of cultural civilization. Mike?
I hate to bring the yugas into this discussion, but it's just so interesting that you go to Bath and you go like, oh yeah, the Romans built this and it's so sophisticated for its time. And then this must have been at least 1,500 years before that, right? Before Bath was built. And it's at least as sophisticated, right? Then it has all those different, like you said, it has all those different rooms with different functions, and it has a sewage system, water. So it's very sophisticated. It maybe even more than some of the Roman cities that were uncovered.
Certainly so. So I'd love to go to Mohenjo-daro, but one day it's in Pakistan, so it creates a bit of a problem for me with my Indian visa stamps all over my passport. Probably not. I'm just probably overthinking it. The other thing that I wanted to say was, so that's those are the sites which are the Indus Valley sites, but cities like Dwarka and Ayodhya. So Dwarka is off the coast of Gujarat, and that's the kingdom of Bhagwan Krishna. And there's a modern day Dwarka, which is a city right now, but they've been uncovering underwater city, would you believe, off the coast, an ancient city of Dwarka, which is now for some reason submerged. So one can only guess as to how old that ancient city is. And similarly, Ayodhya, which is the birthplace of Ram, is older than Krishna's time, but unfortunately through all the invasions, shall we say, of in northern India especially, they used to destroy all historical things as part of their kind of neutralizing the culture, making everyone conform to new ways, new life, new culture. Yeah, Mike?
Dwarka is super interesting, and it's so beautiful. Like if you Google Dwarka underwater and you look at the pictures, it's crazy. And I wonder if something like what we talk about now with sea level rise and global warming, if those kind of cycles have something to do with why it is now there, and maybe a lot of the lost civilization cities that we're looking for are underwater because the sea level is higher now than it was back in those days.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Hopefully those discoveries and more scientific work will be done, but it's obviously quite hard to uncover a city that's underground in mainland, let alone off the coast of in the ocean. So you can understand why it's taking its royal time after the first discovery. I think it was like 10-15 years ago when they first discovered this, but it's taking its time. I think the Archaeological Society in India probably doesn't have the budget of a US Archaeological Survey Department. But yeah, Chris.
Yeah, there's a bit of a war going on at the minute with timelines and the evolution of man, essentially, in civilization at the moment, between a lot of the archaeological world and, dare I say the name, Graham Hancock, because in those spaces he is controversial. But I think the theory, if not the practice, it's been shown that the sea levels rose some 12,000 years ago, and they're theorizing because it was a meteor strike that hit the planet, hit the ice caps at the time, and caused this extreme flooding, which is interesting that we have the stories in the Bible with the great floods and these ideas as well. So yeah, could be a lot more to come in our lifetimes with finding out new cities underwater, and maybe the language that they spoke will be revealed as Sanskrit around India. So.
It would be a job for an engineer, Priyank, to somehow find a way to maybe build a wall around Dwarka and then make it so you can walk in there, get rid of the water, pump the water out.
Oh gosh, you're interesting.
That would be amazing.
Interesting you say these words, because as I was going around some of the ancient sites in India, like Hampi and Ajanta and Ellora, there's so much that has yet to be uncovered, and obviously I've got no clue as to how to do that. But the dream kind of enters your mind. Oh, maybe you can contribute in some way. And I thought, when I get back to London, I'm going to do an archaeology like part-time degree. Let's see if that materializes. Or that's one of those pipe dreams that just enters the marrow and then swiftly vacates it. But yeah, Chris, about what you just said about the rethinking of the evolution of man and the history of civilization. Guruji kind of touches on that in this footnote. Firstly, he says that he describes the Sanskrit as the most perfect language, and we kind of describe the science as to why he's saying that in terms of its structure and pronunciation and all that kind of stuff. But Sir William Jones, founder of the Asiatic Society, says whatever be its antiquity is of wonderful structure, more perfect than Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. Which is quite a compliment, you might say. But then I really like this next bit, because it kind of says that I might as well read it. Since the revival of classical learning, the Encyclopedia Americana states, there has been no other event in history of culture as important as the discovery of Sanskrit, in square brackets, by Western scholars. in the latter part of the 18th century. So he's suggesting here, and the book by, The Miraculous Birth of Language, which is previously referenced, also emphasizes this importance of that discovery of Sanskrit and the complexity and the history of Sanskrit. Because before, the idea of ancient languages and ancient civilizations it was in the Middle East, and that's where civilization sprang. But then you've got this language in India, which is more refined even, and as ancient, if not more ancient. Then he's saying that it's important, that discovery. And I love that he's put in brackets the discovery of Sanskrit in brackets by Western scholars, which is such a good addition there, because it was always there.
Yeah,
people always knew about it. It's just that the West found it and then realized it's important, and then added it to their version of the narrative of the development of language and civilization. I love in India, you always find this ancient temple was discovered by the British, or it was carved out by this chap or that chap. And I refuse to believe the locals in that area that live down the road didn't know that this temple existed. It's just an impossible claim, surely, but they do claim various things such as that. But yeah, I thought it was a really, really fascinating footnote for those who are historically inclined to dig a little bit beneath the surface, or a lot beneath the surface, as possibly we have done. And that pretty much at 39 minutes and 59 seconds, Mike, I think that completes.
I'm impressed, but we're not done yet. So we'll see where this goes.
That pretty much completes the footnote. I think it was very nice. And with that, we can probably move on to chapter 3, unless anyone has got any final reflections on the first of the epic footnotes.
I just want to say, because we were talking about George Bernard Shaw earlier, like I'm not sure how famous he is in England, but I had to read him as part of my English classes in Austria when I grew up, and we read this book, I think it's called The Pygmalion, right? Which is like what My Fair Lady is based on, which I don't know, not my favorite story, but it is very, very big, and I think it was, even the play was first time they actually showed it was in Vienna, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Very good, very good, Mike. Your English education was better than mine, by the sounds of things.
Well, you went to school and already knew English. We had to learn it from scratch.
No, I had to learn it from scratch as well. When I came 5, I knew not a word. This book, if people are interested on Sanskrit, I'll put a link to the book that I'm getting. I did my semester on Sanskrit on by Mora. Put a link on the description. It's a very good Sanskrit language introductory book. Very well laid out, scientific.
We like it.
I don't know, is that how you like it, Lauren? I feel like you're more of a flary, non-engineering-y person.
I have a more scientific inclination.
Oh, you do?
To things. Yeah. So I think I prefer a mix of intuition mixed with science. That's how I approach things, but I do like to have the factual base. Yeah.
Chris?
I said to Lauren just before we recorded this, like looking at this footnote, reading it through, digesting it, and now listening to you, Priyank, and the passion that you speak about Sanskrit and the knowledge that you have. If I wasn't learning Portuguese right now, I would think, okay, I have some time, let's try to pick up another language and do Sanskrit because it is beautiful. I've heard people, I can't say talk, can I, Priyank? How do you say this?
Recite
mantras in Sanskrit, and it's just beautiful. It just really has I listen to people do the Gita readings in Sanskrit as it's gorgeous to listen to. So yeah, if I didn't have other languages on my plate, I think my more adult brain is slower to pick things up. I think as I get older, I would be trying to learn Sanskrit because it is just beautiful.
And interesting, there's 20 other North Indian languages that have their own script, but that are derived from Sanskrit. So this is a bit like in England you have people from Northern Ireland, you have Geordies that speak very different
Scottish.
Yeah, Scottish, yeah, that speak in a very different accent, which is at times you can't incomprehensible. But India has the same thing, so, and that's across states that are bigger than Europe. But how they deal with that is they've got their own language system. Each state has its own language, and each, like before, there were kingdoms, and so each state has its own language and its own script, and it's a fully developed script. So there's literature in each of those languages, but they're derived from Sanskrit. So the Gujarati, the structure of the Gujarati language has some variations on Sanskrit, and that allows for the local dialectical variations. So, for example, Gujarat being so close to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia was susceptible of a lot of invasions in those areas. So, Urdu and Persian languages influence Gujarat much more than South India, for example. So letters that aren't in Sanskrit, like z, the word z, is a very Persian type of consonant, is in Gujarati, but it's not in Sanskrit. So variations in dialectical, parts of India is catered for by their own language and their own writing system, but Sanskrit is fixed, unchangeable over the course of millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, shall we end it? Oh, Mike.
Yes, I have one more idea. Maybe one way to make GB Shaw happy, we could just use Devanagari as our script for English. I even found English to Devanagari converter online, which I just tried out, and I cannot really tell if it works well or not because I don't know any Devanagari.
It does work very well, actually. So the Romanized vowels. So, for example, the word A, the letter A. So, for example, bat. You just put B-A-T. But if you wanted to put the word, what's that? What's a word with the R sound? Think of a word that's got an R sound, not just an A sound. Bar, yes.
Bar.
Bat.
Yeah.
So bat would be B-A-T. Bar, B-A-R, is, even though it's spelled virtually the same, with the Romanized Devanagari script of English, there will be B-A, A with a line on the top of it, which designates the R sound. So it'll be bar. So then you can do that, and that is actually how you read Indian scripture in English. So if you look at God talks with Arjuna, you'll see that there's all these symbols. But if you do a bit of digging as to the Romanized English pronunciation of those symbols, then you can pronounce it effectively the same as a Sanskrit scholar would pronounce it just by reading an English, the English Romanized Sanskrit Devanagari text. So there you go.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. But for those who are into philology and such things, Mike?
Another problem would be creating a keyboard with 50 letters on it, right? Like in Devanagari.
Yes,
Yeah.
Indeed. On that note, let us end it there. We shall see you for the next chapter. Thank you very much for joining us, Mike, Lauren and Chris, and our audience. Jai Guru.
Thank you, Jai Guru.